How to intro this book.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, five, four. I'm counting down. Welcome to the Into the Weeds Book Club. Is that what we're calling it? Whatever. This is a brand new thing we're going to try. Today we're talking about a book that nobody but me wanted to read.
Yeah, in the
Every
entire world.
it may be very, very difficult for me here today in this book club because we read The Road to Wigan Pier, which is George Orwell's last book. And now we're going to talk about it. And I'll go last. I'm going to throw it out to you guys. And I know Phil got about 75 pages in and then sent me a text and said, "Why the hell are we reading
Yeah.
this?
Huh, huh, huh.
Why are we
I know the
reading?"
feeling.
Okay,
So,
and by the way, just to be clear, the only reason I only sent it to Jubal is because at that point I didn't have Jim's number because I would have
right,
sent it to him as well.
right.
Would have
So,
been like,
And
why
I
are
would have
we reading
responded.
this?
so in fairness, I also want to say I also want to point out that the last book Phil read was The Life of Pi, which is a very different read
Yeah,
than this.
yeah.
This is a nonfiction sort of a report from the front about what it was like to be a coal miner in England circa 1935. And so anyway, we haven't talked in depth about it. I haven't talked about it really in depth with either one of you guys yet. So Phil, why don't you kick it off and then Dad, you can go second.
Okay, so let me just lay out sort of the structure of the book. So really, in many ways, it's two books in one.
Mhm.
For part one of the book is Orwell essentially reporting from the front lines. He's gone into the mining areas and communities of the working class. We're talking England, 1930s. And he's sort of describing their life and the conditions they live under, the squalor. And does a very like deep description of like what life is like in the mines itself and
Hmm.
talks about what they have to go through, even like their eating habits and what life is like, describes like the kind of homes they live in. So he goes into some great detail. And basically the idea is that these people are doing this critically important work, providing energy for the industrialization of England. But they're basically invisible. People don't really know
Right.
what their life is like. So the first part is sort of Orwell almost we think of him as a fictional writer, but in this case, he's really acting as a journalist and he's
Mhm.
reporting from the front about this is what's going on. And then the second half of the book is like a separate topic entirely. And in the second half of the book, and I'll just describe it very briefly, and this is when we can get into it, he's sort of discussing, uh, lamenting, complaining about the inability of socialists at the time to be able to connect with the working class. And we'll talk about this some more. But he's even talking about the extent to which he believes that the people who call them socialists kind of look down on the working class, look down on the miners. Um, and so, in many ways, the second half of the book, which kind of pissed off the people who he was writing the book for, this group called the Left Book Club or something. They commissioned him to write this. He basically uses an opportunity to say, your public relations efforts are terrible.
Right.
You're
Yeah,
completely ineffective. And I'll just leave it at that. And Jim, if you want to jump
yeah.
in.
Well, now you described it accurately. For me, it was two books and two separate emotional responses for me. The first part, oh my God, when I had, I've seen movies about coal mining, how green was my valley and all that stuff. And it made coal mining look, well, it was kind of maybe it was something somebody would want to do. Whoa, the way he describes coal mining. It was a fate worse than death. I mean, these people. You think me? I was thinking of coal miners that are up on their on their hands, chopping and digging, or that. These guys are on their knees constantly. They are never up on their feet, and they're hunched over all the time. And in fact, a lot of times they have to travel. Juba, what is that called?
Yeah, they called it traveling. It's
Traveling
you have to
on their
move
knees, a
right
hundred yards, 150 yards, even longer. Even
miles
up to a quarter of
sometimes.
a mile.
Yeah.
and they don't get paid for that. That was another thing. You don't get paid while you're crawling. You only get paid while you're picking.
And
And
then
and
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 just to add to it, that's just to get to the area where they're actually taking off coal.
that's
So
Right.
it.
they go down this elevator shaft, crawl on their hands and knees, hunched over, carrying their equipment to get to where they're working. And just like Jim said, they're getting paid for none of that.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm going, holy, and then they describe how they're hunched over, and and how hard. I mean, it's a just a horrific job. You would you would think it would be something that the Romans that would make slaves do. You think of
Right.
what's his face, the slave who revolted against the Romans. You think that's
Spartacus.
Spartacus. You think that's what the Spartacus was doing and all that stuff. There's my Broca area again. I couldn't remember
There you go.
Spartacus. And so at any rate, you would think, well, God, yes, I'm thinking, Jesus fucking Christ, yes. I mean, I would be a socialist. You could, and then how they were their families and how they are living, people crowded in the space, 6, 7, 8, 10 people in a house. They're sleeping in 3, 4, 5 beds in the same room. One guy describes how he had to sleep curled up until his buddy got up at 5 in the morning, and then he could stretch his legs out without kicking him. And you're gonna go, oh my God, this is horrifying to me. And no, there's no how in the houses they have. And another thing, you have a house, and the porta potty, or not the porta potty, the John would be maybe 100 yards away, or
Right.
150 yards away.
Right.
They have to go walk away around it. You
They have
go to
trench
you,
latrines that everybody
oh,
shares, and
and
yeah,
oh my God, it just, and I got to a point where I was telling Jubal, not last night, but the night before last, I couldn't sleep. That's all that stuff was just coming to my mind, how they're living, how the agony, why they would do this. I mean, there must be another. I would be a criminal if I would just go be a bank robber or something. I can't see how I or if not that, then a beggar on the street. I'd rather beg on the street than do that. And
sure.
it was pretty
It,
horrific.
I mean, we're of course saying that from the privilege of the present, right?
Right.
That
Yeah,
we're,
exactly. And
we're
and but
surrounded by,
what they were doing was creating the Industrial Revolution. Without
right,
them, there is no Industrial Revolution. And
right.
you go, how much do we owe these people for being, willing to do that?
And
And
I think that was Orwell's point, right? Was
yeah,
that
yes, exactly. Yeah.
these guys lived this life of extreme difficulty and squalor, and at the same time, in
That's
so
the word.
doing,
Yeah.
were the ones who were they had the entire industrialized world on their shoulders, in the sense that without them there's no power, there's the machines stop. And it's kind of a sobering thing.
At least in England, this is what was going on. Now I don't know
Sure.
what was going on in the rest of Europe, what they have for that, or if England, if coal from England fed the rest of Europe. I don't know the reality of that, but at
Well,
least
coal mining at the time, it wasn't like you didn't have a bunch of technological choices. It wasn't automated like it is today. It was guys with picks, and
yeah,
wherever the coal mine is, it's going to be a very similar thing.
yeah.
So the
And then he talks about there's one guy that was, his hands were always, soot and shit on it. I mean, he'd hand you a piece of bread or something and leave his
that was
finger marks on it.
so Mr. Brooker,
Yeah, right.
who was the lodger, the one who owned the tenants, where the building where the tenants stayed.
Yeah.
One of them had these legendarily dirty hands, right? They were always black. And anytime he would serve you your breakfast or your lunch, he would insist on there would be a big black thumbprint on the bread, and then you'd see him later carrying, the toilets down from upstairs, and he'd have
The chamber
he'd,
pots.
the
Yeah.
chamber pots, and he'd have his thumb over the edge, and Orwell does a great job of describing
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of the
he was absolutely, when he did that, he was absolutely brilliant, no question.
sure.
I didn't much like his style. His style is like one paragraph a page style, but made it a very
It
laborious
was a
read.
dense book. It
Yeah.
reminded me of in sections. It reminded me of Melville. It reminded me of Moby Dick, in that
There was certain,
when
yeah, I could see that.
Melville gets into the process of how they how they go out and they hunt whales and they process them and they get the oil and they put it in the barrels and like the how the ship works and what everybody's job is. It was very matter of fact,
Yes.
and it was very much like this, and it was completely alien. Just like this is a completely alien way of living, and as you say, it was terrifying. What were your emotions that you were feeling as you were reading it, Phil? It was the first section.
Well, aside from anger at you, anger at you for making me read this book. That was the
Yes,
first.
yes, yes. Don't feel like the Lone Ranger, like I say. Yes,
There we go.
Okay.
I'm
So,
going. What the,
so actually, the first part of the book, it's sort of redundant, right? And so he goes through this in some detail.
Mhm.
So, I was already somewhat familiar with the life of miners, not in England during this time, but Jubal and I had been talking previously about a book by John Gaventa called Power and Powerlessness, which is about the Appalachian miners here in the United States. And so I was familiar with the description um, of sort of what their life was like. And so, yeah, I don't think I had a lot of emotion. It was just like, it was a very matter. It's interesting. We were talking about just now about how they were basically um, making the Industrial Revolution possible. But
Mhm.
it's not like Orwell was romanticizing what they did or
Right.
talking about in any kind of romantic terms. He was doing like a journalistic account, and he was just trying to be as accurate as possible. And as you can see from Jim's reaction, he did a good job because you
Yeah.
couldn't help but think like, what a fucking life is that? And I don't recall him talking about them complaining about it, about feeling put upon. This was just their life. And
Mhm.
so the first part of the book was very much just sort of a deep dive into what life was like in the 1930s in England. In not, it wasn't exclusively the miners because he was talking about shopkeepers and other people as well, but
Right.
just how difficult life was. And so Jubal's right that we're looking at it from our position now, each in our respective homes on our
Right.
computers, talking via Zoom. So but he brings you there, and he does a good job. I was surprised because we know he's a great writer. It wasn't like there weren't a lot of rhetorical flourishes. There were some funny lines, and
There were.
he does like manage to get a couple jokes in there every
yeah,
now
he
and
does.
then,
Yeah, he
but
does.
which was surprised. So it was a nice
Yeah,
break every once in a while.
Right.
But anyways, that was my thought.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's that's the first step is a journalist. Unlike see, Melville's a novelist, and so he
Mhm.
approaches it from a different frame of mind. And Orwell was just what it is, what it is, what it is,
Right.
what it is,
Right.
and what it is no way. But you say, why do these people do that? And one of the things he talks about is how fit they were from all this
Right.
money, not an ounce of fat on any one of them. And they were proud about that. And he said, and he also talked about this was thing that when the elevators go down, he said the elevators will go down really fast, and sometimes
Right.
and if they didn't, brakes didn't work, wham, they crashed and died. That was another thing that because they had to go so deep and they didn't spend much time doing it. But that was the first part of the book. The second part of the book is when he goes into his understanding of socialism and such, and it was interesting, but again, it was laborious because his uh, his thoughts on socialism is that socialism is the only way to bring freedom and justice.
Right.
That was what the words he kept, freedom and justice. And it was interesting that he was not a fan of Marxism, that was kind of fascinating. But no, he wasn't a
Nor
fan of.
nor fascism, and
Well,
he was
faction,
he
but he
was
did say about faction. This was an interesting thing. He said fascism is just like socialism without all the good things. He said, that's what he said. Fascism is socialism without any of the good things in it. And I'm going, well, what were the good things?
right.
So,
I,
huh,
I do think that he throws those terms around socialism, Marxism,
yeah,
communist. capitalist. And much like today, I find myself not entirely sure what his definitions are of those terms, right? And this is
Exactly.
a problem
That's
that
it. Yeah.
Phil and I have run into, is that it's very difficult to come to have a substantive conversation without very closely defining what all these words mean,
And he did
right?
not do that. He didn't.
He didn't,
Yeah.
and I think that that was probably the most detrimental part of the book, is that he's describing socialism and fascism in the way that the world understood those terms in 1935,
Yeah, to a certain
which is
extent. Yeah.
very different than the way we understand them today,
Yeah.
right? And so I do think that some element of that of what he was trying to say was lost. But there were a lot of things that paralleled the thinking of today. As you said, he kept talking about freedom and justice. For him, the socialistic effort was a kind of social justice. And he also talks about oppression, the oppression matrix
Excuse me a second. This
that
is Elaine. I'm sorry. I have to think.
oh, that's all right. Uh, so
Right.
he talks here. We'll just pause it. We'll pause it real quick. So, in addition to the social justice elements, which is something that people like to think of as something that's very modern, the social justice movement, he talks about the oppression matrix and how his thinking. One page 148, I think he goes into it. He talks about how his thinking was that anybody who is oppressed is always right, and anybody who is the oppressor is always wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, he did make that. That was back then. Yes.
Right. And so that sort of mirrors a lot of the oppression Olympics that's happening today, where people are making their case that certain kinds of oppression are taking place and shouldn't be, or whatever the argument is. So it's fascinating to see, even though this is 100 years old, a lot of the ideas really do parallel things that we're still talking about.
And
Absolutely.
he had a big
And
thing.
go ahead,
He
Joe.
had a big thing of trying to understand the working class or the working
Right.
person, the working man. He was trying, because from what he was, his way he grew up and everything, he didn't understand the working man. There was the working man is a whole different way of being than everything else. And so he was, trying to, and so many people were trying to, of his kind, were trying to pretend to be uh, understanding of the working man and just weren't. And he even said working people had a different smell about them. That was,
Yeah, it was interesting how he
yeah,
used smell. That the saying that someone smells bad is such a fundamental insult. He also said something that I thought was really fascinating. He said, if you want to make an enemy of someone, tell them that their faults are incurable.
yeah, that
Right.
was brilliant.
That was a lot of the bourgeois of the time. They saw themselves as, oh, we want to help the poor, but at the same time, they didn't want to smell the poor. Right.
Right.
So what were you going to say, Phil?
No, it was going along with what you were saying, and part of his argument is that he feels like the socialists who are sort of trying to win over the working class and the miners and things
Mhm.
like that, that they really look down on these people.
That's right.
He sees them as like sort of cultural elites, and how they use terminology. He talks about the whole Marxist like thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing, and he's just basically saying nobody talks like that. You're not
Yeah.
going to win these people over by talking about things like that.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if you guys read the introduction by one of the authors, and he takes offense at everything that's much of what Orwell wrote about, because essentially I get the impression he was attacking his very ilk, these sort of cultural elites who talk about him. And so he felt the need to go ahead and write in an introduction that said, like, I disagree with Mr. Orwell on this and on that and on this. So he clearly favored socialism like Jubal. I'm not sure exactly what he meant by
Right.
that term, as opposed to Marxism, as opposed to communism, whatever. I'm not sure what he meant. But I mean, it was grounded in the idea, sort of what we were talking about before, was that here you have this group of people who are performing this incredible function that makes
Mm.
the life of
Crucial
so many
function,
people
necessary.
possible. Yeah, absolute crucial function that makes the life of like the bourgeois class and all these people,
Right,
it makes their life possible,
right,
but they're getting relatively nothing for their efforts.
right.
And so I think that whatever he meant by socialism, it was to rectify that.
Yeah,
I think I can
to
say
that.
add to that. I think I can add an insight to that. His big thing was the socialism, as he saw it, was people of goodwill. People of goodwill could not help but become socialists when they see
Right,
what's going on around them. And the enemy is profit. Profit was the enemy. What his thing was, we eliminate profit when people of goodwill, and everything will
right,
just kind of like in evolution, everything will just kind of evolve down and take its place. Eliminate profit and get people of goodwill together. That was kind of, but he
right.
didn't really understand the economics of it. Profit was
Right.
bad, and that's it.
And he made no bones about being against capitalism.
Yeah,
He outright called it evil. But do keep in mind that this took place, that his writing took place at a time long before really the modern ideas of unions, of workers' rights, of civil rights really even existed. Right.
yeah. They were just
This
getting
was
started in the 30s, the
right.
20s and 30s.
This
Yeah,
was still very much laissez-faire capitalism at work. But he also talked about the housing, and I know
yeah.
Phil hated how he had these the descriptions of homes and how much they would rent for, and it was like this whole tabulated thing. And Phil is like, ah, it's so boring.
Just be clear, this is part one of the book.
Part one, okay. So he's talking about all these houses, but the main thrust of what he was saying was, here's these 100,000 people living in this slum, and the houses that they're living in are condemned, but they have no other houses to move into, and so they have to stay in these condemned houses. Right? People are just you keep living in these condemned houses. Sure,
Their wives and children.
I
Yeah,
would love to move into a new house, but you've got 100,000 people living in this area, and you've got 1,100 new homes being built a year, right? So yeah, it's a 100-year long list to get a new house, right? So that's one of the problems that Orwell attributed to capitalism, in the sense that he's saying this is a failing of capitalism. So the real economic story is a little bit deeper, a little bit more nuanced than that. But still, just
yeah.
from where he was coming from, it was it was a solid criticism. Go ahead, Dad.
But that, yeah, I agree with you. And his thing about capitalism is they were little fat guys. That's what he called them.
Right,
The little fat guys.
right,
And,
And
and is in its discussion of socialism, right? If we take that to mean essentially, I mean, the way that I thought about it was he was talking about essentially nationalizing the mines, right?
right.
I mean, I think that's the way you're talking about that the government takes over, but the government takes over the control of the mines, and now they run it instead of these private businesses.
Right.
But when you think about this rich description of the life of the miners, one of the things that I thought about is explain to me how the government being in charge of this operation
Makes it
changes
better.
their
Right,
life one bit, right? Because
right.
if Mr. Brookings or whatever his name is still walking around with his hands all dirty and they're still hunched over, I mean, maybe you increase their pay, maybe you provide better housing or stuff like that. But the life, so he didn't really go into that. It just seemed to me that the second part of the book was essentially him saying to Marxists in particular, which he seemed to have a lot of them directed at, and socialists in general, um, like it was he used it as an opportunity to say, you guys are fucking up, right? No wonder we can't get any purchase with these working people
Right.
because you don't like them and they know you don't like them. They can tell you don't like them.
He saw it as a fundamental truth that it just makes sense that everybody should be productive as productive as they are able, and everybody should receive the resources that they need to live their lives, right? That's just common sense. And that does tend to be the mode that most socialists are operating on. Is it's just fairness, just simple
Right.
fairness, right?
If
Of
you
course,
fairness, if you're people of goodwill and you're fair, it will just happen.
exactly.
It just
It
has,
just
and
emerges.
there's a truth in that, that you want good things to happen to people. The problem
Sure.
comes, of course, in the policies that are used to make things happen, and he doesn't go into
Right.
that at all.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's just
He doesn't get too deep into policy. He talks about a lot of philosophy.
yeah,
Right. But
and
we know that in later books, so whether you're talking about
Mhm.
1984, whether you're talking about Animal Farm, um, he also clearly, and so those were written before. I didn't realize this was his last book.
Mhm.
no,
Right.
no,
So
no,
That's
no, no. This
that's my
book was written
understanding.
no, no. This book
oh,
was
okay.
written before Animal Farm and before
Was
1984
it?
was his last book.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it was
That was
published
my impression.
the
So,
year he died. Yeah.
but so what we know is that both in 1984 and then in Animal Farm, he's talking about sort of both those books are
Was this
about
his
sort.
first book?
No, no. This was like his third or fourth book. He went to Burma and was a police guy, and he wrote a book about Burma being the
Okay.
police
I'm sorry for
officer.
interrupting. I'm sorry for
Yeah,
interrupting. Go ahead,
yeah.
Phil.
No, that's good because I know at the very beginning of the book they list his books, although I don't know if they're in chronological order. Oh yeah, no, right. Jim is absolutely right. So this is actually his fifth book, and 1984 is his last book,
Yeah,
or the last book that. Oh no,
yeah, it
no,
was
not
his last
yeah,
book.
no.
Okay.
Animal Farm is 1945.
Right.
1984 comes out in 1949.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
but
he wrote this. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so he clearly is concerned about concentration of power. I mean, that's what 1984 is all about.
Mhm.
Is like the government has too much power. Um, in Animal Farm, the idea is even the people who lead the revolution, once they're in charge and they have the power, they're indistinguishable from the oppressors, right?
They're as big as
Meet the new boss,
assholes.
same as the
Yeah.
old boss, right?
Right, exactly. So in his discussion of because he never talks about what he means by socialism, um, we can only extrapolate from his later writings that he's
Right.
not talking about, and maybe his views evolved over time. He's not talking about a. It doesn't seem like he's talking about a command economy where power is controlled by the state. So I think Jubal's absolutely right. One of the fundamental problems is he's using these words that have huge impact, um, and are obviously very meaningful. We just don't know what he means by them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't. Yeah, he didn't quite understand the economic systems. How economics works. I mean, who does?
And
But
the economic
yeah,
systems were very different 100 years
yeah.
ago. I mean, that's just the reality,
Well, they were
right?
and,
evolving.
and and I don't think he was really speak. It seems to me like he really wasn't speaking about the economics. He was basically saying we got a public relations problem. Here's
Right.
what the problem is.
That's
It was
right.
like it was more like a sort of
PR.
you guys are losing. You guys might be right, but you're
Right.
losing the argument. And
All the socialists,
let me
uh,
tell you in detail why you're losing.
right? Every socialist is like a sandal wearing nudist eating flour cookies and being weird.
And
So nobody's going to
and
listen
fruit,
to him,
and he kept talking about fruit drinkers. What
right?
was that?
What was that
This
about? I did.
I
You
had no
know,
I don't
idea.
know. Apparently, fruit juice was a weird thing back
Fruit
then.
I
juice
guess.
and right,
So
fruit juicers with their sandals and stuff like
So
that.
Yeah.
there's one last part of the book that I want to talk about that I was surprised by because I had read this book before,
You
but it
read
was
it
some
before and read it again.
I read this
There's a
book.
glutton for punishment.
I thought it was an
Oh,
amazing book.
yeah.
I thought it was an amazing book. But anyway,
I think a thunderstorm is amazing, but I only need to be in it once to go. Oh, I know.
Oh, also, by way, before Jubal goes into his final point, I just want to point out that for Father's Day, what he did is he bought this book for Jim
Yeah.
and had him read it. That was his gift,
but and right,
which
That's true.
obviously means that Jubal has some pent up hostility.
yeah,
And we'll talk about.
I'm a bad son. Apparently, I'm a bad
He
son.
really hates me.
Go on,
So,
Jamal. I'm sorry.
no, 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 it's all right. It's all right. I'm sorry you guys didn't like it more.
Oh no,
So,
no, I no, don't get me wrong. The book, I'm glad I read the book.
hmm,
It was
Same here.
just it was
okay,
just a
good.
horrible experience. I'm not a horrible experience. It was just
Okay, well, that's,
a difficult
I'm
experience.
glad I got stabbed in the eye. So
Yeah. So
the
I came to
last,
appreciate my other eye.
that's right. So the last part of the book that I found really fascinating, and that also parallels conversations that are happening today. I think that you could absolutely take everything that he was talking about as far as mechanization is concerned, and the emergence of technology and machines, and apply that to the AI conversation that we're having today, right?
100%.
Because he was
I mean, I almost felt
basically
like you could take out mechanization, put in
put in
AI.
AI and it would
You
be
didn't
all the
even have to
same
change the
arguments. Right.
sentences.
Right.
Right.
And it's fascinating to see, again, 100 years ago, that people were having such a similar philosophical combat over what's good and what's proper. He was basically saying, okay, we keep making these machines that make our lives easier and softer, that do all the work for us. And then, and so what do we do then with our leisure time? Well, maybe we want to garden. Okay, but then you just get a machine that does your gardening for you, and then so now your leisure time is what? Just doing nothing. He's like the entire technological race is just to turn us into a brain in a jar, right? Where we're
Yeah.
just looking
Well,
around.
I'm not sure I agree totally with
I
that,
I
but
know I don't either. I don't either because he certainly things change as time goes by. Jobs change, specializations change. The whole purpose of employment churn, that you free up people who are working, doing manual labor, and you free them up with machines so that they can specialize in new things, and you can explore those things, and those things move to the technician level. And become automated, and then you get more specialists that are looking at new things. Like
it's
you
simpler.
know,
Yeah.
you look back at jobs, try to explain to somebody today what an apothecary is, right? Or a
Oh.
rag and bone man, right? Or a fishmonger. Like there are jobs that don't exist anymore
Yeah.
because they've been automated out of existence. But then,
Farrier. What's a farrier? Yeah.
right, right, a farrier. But
Huh.
then, very, very similarly, try to explain to somebody 100 years ago what an influencer is,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
But
Or an HR manager, right? Like
yeah.
they're just going to look at you like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So things change as time goes on, and that's basically what you're doing is you're freeing up labor with machines so that people can specialize and do more interesting
Yeah,
things with.
that was one of his big things. It was not to be afraid of the machines. He said people were,
But then, yeah, but then also
don't be
his
afraid of the machines,
don't be afraid of the machines. But he was also critiquing over reliance on machines in the
Yeah,
same way
okay.
that people
Yeah.
critique the use of AI today, right? And say,
Yeah.
oh, it's
Well, I
it's
saw it. I when I was reading, I was thinking of the when the computers came on. People were so afraid of computers,
right,
and they had all the in the movies about how computers going bad and taking over the world and all of that.
sure, sure.
19. What
Right.
was it with Schwarzenegger and all that? Which is a great
Terminator,
movie. I love the movies,
you
but it
know,
was the other computers and so on. That's what he was saying. Don't go down that paranoia road. Machines are going to make things better and better and better. We just have to learn how to live with the machines and treat people with humanity and that are dealing with that was the bottom line. But he just, I think, from my experience was he just figured you get people of goodwill and they understand what's going on, socialism will just happen on its own. It just there's
right,
no other way. It can't not happen. And but you have to be on the same level with working people. You can't be you can't be a leader of working people if you think yourself better than working people. That was
right,
so that was
Right. And he did talk about the idea that machines free people up for leisure. And I just kept wondering, how do they pay for the leisure? Like, right, you
mm,
still have to make money and do stuff. So it was interesting. There were a lot of things that were left out. And it's the easiest thing in the world to criticize a book over is when it doesn't
He
include.
himself really didn't understand what he was saying in certain ways. What are these machines? He was trying to understand, but
right,
he didn't have a complete grip on his own on himself and his writing style. When it came to the first part of the book, his writing style, yeah, that was. But the second part of the book, you're going, I'm going to skip this page. Jubal, I think I'm going to skip this page here,
it was
or I got
dense.
to.
It
I
was
got to
dense.
doing what I did in high school. You read the first, because he had such a big paragraph. You read the first two sentences of the paragraph and the last two sentences of the paragraph, and you kind of fill
It
in
was pretty
between.
dense.
Yeah,
So I
and
mean, in your final takeaway, Dad. I mean, what was he? What was the meaning of this? What was the
final
purpose of the
takeaway:
book?
he was a prophet. He was a he was a and a prophet of of the and the battle with machine, not the conflict with the machine age. You know that what's going to be happening with you're these people are not out growing their own food and having farms and stuff. They're down into the ground
Mm,
and I get to the point where you think, which I think he thought, why are these people doing this? Teach
mm,
your children not to do this.
mm.
You don't let your children be doing that. That's what the ultimate guilty party is the people that are doing it. They should rise up and say, wait, we got to, that would take unions and stuff like that,
Sure.
and that was a thing to come, and to rise up and say, we just can't have this,
Mm.
and we can't let our kids grow up like this. We can't. This is just not going to work.
But
But
then
he didn't
what's the
understand. But he didn't really have an answer. He didn't say, "Let's do this, and this."
mm,
His thing was, "Let's just get rid of profit, and everything will take care of itself." And
right?
I don't see that.
But then of course, what's the alternative, right? There's a movie that I liked that a lot of people liked called Fight Club,
Yes.
and the whole philosophy of the main character Tyler Durden, who is the guy in the story who's telling the story basically, is that he wants to blow everything up and start over again, move us back to an agrarian society where things were more fair and consistent. And is that really an improvement, to blow up all the systems that we have in place and move back where everybody's doing their own farming again? I mean, isn't that what we've spent decades, centuries trying to get away from? Is scratching a meager existence out of the rocks? Um, so yeah, for my part, I think that at the end of the day, Orwell had some meaningful criticisms of society that still resonate today. And I think that he was sort of over fond of his own opinion in the sense that he's like, look, socialism is just going to happen. It's just what reasonable people do, right? Anybody who's reasonable is going to get to this end. And my argument to that would be, it's more complicated than that, right? There are a
It
lot of
is,
ways
especially
to,
when you get the Marxists involved and the Nazis and so on. I
sure.
thought that was so interesting. You say, "Oh, Nazism is just like socialism, only doesn't have any of the good things."
That's funny. That's funny. So what was your last and final takeaway, Phil? What do you think?
So for me, like you said, the his discussion about mechanization, machines, so closely track the discussion that we're having over AI, and as Jim
Yes, I
suggested,
agree.
sort of so closely tracked how people were talking about computers when they started coming
Mhm.
out. That it's fascinating. They say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and so
Right.
you could hear the rhyme of history in that. I At one point I wanted to take an excerpt out, take out machines, stick in AI, and say, guess when
Right.
this was written, right? Because
Right.
when people found out it was 1930s, right, it would be a surprise. The other thing, speaking as sort of talking about contemporaneously, is that I thought a lot of his criticisms of socialists actually apply to some of the people who now today call themselves democratic socialists.
Mhm.
Yes.
That I think some of their language, some of their terminology, I think leaves some people less not quite attracted to what it is they're talking about.
Sure.
And oftentimes for me, as somebody who's on the left, when I hear them talking, it's like they're talking to themselves.
Right.
It's like a bunch of, and I say this as somebody who's college educated, a bunch of college educated young people who are talking about these big ideas. And I wonder what they think about, a plumber or a miner or somebody who does that kind of work. How much respect do they really have for them?
Mhm.
They talk a good game, but it feels like sometimes they're talking about themselves. So I think anybody who's interested or wondering why their people on the left, why their ideas aren't connecting with people whose interests would be served, in their view, by adopting these policies. Orwell kind of lays out in language some ideas that might be useful for somebody who's looking for a way to understand why what seems to them to be completely
Right.
obvious, this is in your best interest, why it's not resonating.
Right.
So that
Right.
was the other thing, just
Some
sort of
ways
from a
to kind of gain
political
traction.
communication.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
Well,
agree
it's
with that.
kind of hard when if you when you're going to say you're going to be the leader, and you haven't done anything in your life. You haven't, you either worked for, in terms of leading a worker, or owned a business or anything. You went, you lived with your mother, the mayor in Washington, in Seattle. She lived at home with her parents, and then ran for mayor on a socialist thing. And the same thing with Mondami. The only job he ever had was as a political person in the state legislature. I mean, that was his only job. So you're looking for people with experience that they might have, that they can translate in order to lead, to lead other people. To and when you don't have any experience, um, you know, I
Makes
don't
it
see
more
how you can
difficult.
lead.
Yeah.
although
That's
I mean, in his particular case, don't want to go down the New York City rabbit hole, but in his particular case, he's such a uniquely gifted speaker
He
that
is. No
obviously,
question. No question.
obviously he connected with people, and that's why he won this election, right?
No question.
Um, but I don't think I don't think everybody has his particular gifts, right? And
sure.
absent those very unique gifts, right, then some of the people who call themselves democratic socialists sound exactly like what Orwell was talking about.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
I think for them reading him, their blood, you could, like, if you could monitor their blood pressure would just gradually go up.
That's
Um,
funny.
so, anyways,
Well,
that was my
so
final takeaway.
with that said, I think we're through.
I'd like to ask a question, one last question before we go.
Sure,
For
sure.
of Phil. Phil, one of the things I find so fascinating about you, as I've told Jubal on a number of occasions, is that here you worked as a plumber for 10 years and then said, well, let's try something else. And now you're a PhD. And I'm going, I've had many patients that were plumbers and working people and so on, but I never, at least off the top of my head, can I remember any working man or woman that I've had that ever had dreams of becoming a PhD or doing something to become intellectually to do that. What drove you to do that?
Short answer is that I fucking hated plumbing. In particular, there we go. Right. Just so you know, Jim, I always warn my students, like, I think like a political scientist, but I still talk like a plumber. So
Sure.
hopefully you can deal with it. I had always wanted to teach and always felt like I had the ability to do that. So even when I was on the job sites, I would go to the work sites and I would bring an English to Spanish dictionary and I would sit down with the workers and try and have conversations with them in Spanish. It wasn't a particularly effective enterprise, but I think for them, knowing that I cared enough that I wanted to understand their language. So oftentimes when I would give instructions, for what I wanted them to do, I would do it in Spanish. So I could speak plumber Spanish. So I'd always wanted to teach. When my business started growing a little bit and I was doing custom homes and I was primarily working for very wealthy people, this is going to be sort of very blunt again. That's my style. It suddenly occurred to me that for me to be successful, basically success as a plumber meant that people could take a shit and they'd never have to see it again. And as long as I could get that done, then I was going to be successful. And it didn't feel like enough of a challenge. And so I decided I want to go ahead and I want to pursue this dream, never imagining that it was going to wind up as a remarkable a journey as it wound up being. But thank
Sure.
you for asking.
Sure. And so to tie it back into the book, you've kind of seen, you, Phil, have seen both sides
Yeah.
of the comparison that Orwell makes. You've seen the working man situation as a plumber, and you've seen the bourgeois, estimation of
a
working people.
college professor.
Right,
Yeah,
that comes from
yeah,
the from academic circles.
yeah.
So that's sort of interesting. Anyway, let's wrap up the book review. We'll call it there. And thanks for joining us, everybody. And we'll see you later.